Imagine waking up one day and realizing that your entire life has been controlled by the way you see things. Every fear, every failure, every heartbreak. Not destroying you, but shaping you. What if the pain you hate the most is actually the thing meant to awaken your true power? Most people live trapped inside invisible mental prisons, repeating the same thoughts, the same doubts, the same limitations. But today, that ends. Today, you will see life differently, because the moment your perspective changes, your reality changes. This is not just motivation. This is a psychological awakening that can transform the person you become forever. Silence. Before your life changes, your perspective must change. Because the world you see is not the world itself. It is the world filtered through your mind, through your wounds, through your fears, through your beliefs, through the stories you repeat to yourself every single day. Two people can walk through the same storm. One becomes bitter, the other becomes powerful. Two people can experience failure. One calls it the end, the other calls it transformation. The event is the same, the perspective is different. And that changes everything. Carl Jung once said, "The world will ask you who you are, and if you do not know, the world will tell you." Most people never realize how deeply their perception controls their destiny. They think their suffering comes from the outside world. They blame circumstances, other people, bad luck, time, the past. But what if the prison was never outside? What if the real prison was the way you learned to see yourself? What if your mind has been repeating the same invisible patterns for years, and you simply became unconscious to them? Listen carefully. You do not suffer because life is hard alone. You suffer because your mind interprets difficulty as defeat. You suffer because you compare your beginning to someone else's middle. You suffer because you expect certainty before action. You suffer because you see rejection as proof of worthlessness, instead of redirection. Perspective changes pain into power. And the moment your perspective changes, your reality begins to change with it. Every transformation begins with a new way of seeing. The strongest people are not those who avoided darkness. They are the people who learned how to walk through darkness differently. Most humans spend their entire lives reacting emotionally to temporary situations. One bad moment destroys their confidence. One criticism destroys their motivation. One betrayal destroys their trust. One failure destroys their courage. But wisdom begins when you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" That single shift can alter the course of your entire life, because life is not only happening to you, life is also shaping you. The pain you resist may contain the lesson you need most. Think about your hardest moments, the heartbreak, the loneliness, the confusion, the rejection, the nights nobody understood you. At the time, it felt unbearable. But look closer. Those moments forced you to grow. They forced you to become deeper, more aware, more independent, more conscious. Your suffering was not meaningless. Sometimes life breaks your illusion to save your soul, and this is why perspective matters. A weak perspective says, "My life is falling apart." A powerful perspective says, "My old life is collapsing so a stronger version of me can emerge." There is a difference between destruction and transformation. The caterpillar probably thinks its world is ending before it becomes a butterfly. And maybe your current confusion is not punishment. Maybe it is preparation. Most people are terrified of change because they confuse familiarity with safety. But familiarity can become a prison. You can become attached to your own suffering simply because it feels known. That is why people stay in toxic relationships. That is why they stay trapped in self-doubt. That is why they repeat destructive habits. The human mind would rather hold on to familiar pain than step into uncertain growth. But your future requires a different perspective than your past. You cannot create a new life with an old mindset. You cannot become powerful while constantly seeing yourself as weak. You cannot heal while identifying completely with your wounds. Your identity shapes your reality. If you constantly tell yourself, "I'm unlucky, I'm broken, I'm not enough, I always fail," your mind will search for evidence to prove those beliefs true. But the opposite is also true. The moment you begin seeing challenge as opportunity, moment you begin seeing fear as growth, moment you begin seeing solitude as self-discovery, your inner world changes. And your outer world follows. Because reality responds differently to people who see differently. There are people who see obstacles, and there are people who see possibilities. There are people who see limitations, and there are people who see potential. The difference is perspective. A mountain can look impossible from below, but from the top, you realize the climb changed you more than the destination itself. Most people want confidence before action, but confidence comes after action. Perspective teaches you that fear is not a signal to stop. Fear is often a signal that you are growing beyond your current identity. The old version of you is uncomfortable because it knows change is happening. Growth feels uncomfortable because transformation requires the death of old patterns. And the ego hates death. That is why people sabotage themselves, not because they truly want failure. Because success would require becoming someone unfamiliar. A new perspective demands responsibility. It demands that you stop waiting for rescue. Nobody is coming to save you. And strangely, that is good news, because it means the power has always been within you. The moment you stop seeing yourself as helpless, you begin reclaiming your life. You are more powerful than you realize. But power without awareness becomes destruction. This is why Jung believed that confronting the shadow is necessary. Your shadow is the hidden side of yourself, the anger you suppress, the jealousy you deny, the fear you avoid, the pain you hide behind smiles. Most people spend their lives pretending to be good, while unconsciously controlled by everything they refuse to face. But healing begins with honesty, not perfection. Honesty, true transformation happens when you stop running from yourself. When you can sit alone in silence and finally ask, who am I beneath the masks? Not the role, not the image, not the performance, the real you, the self beneath the expectations of society. Because many people are living lives they never consciously chose. They became what others expected. They abandoned their dreams to gain approval. They sacrificed authenticity to avoid rejection, and slowly, they lost themselves. But there comes a moment in every meaningful life where the soul becomes tired of pretending. A moment where external success no longer hides internal emptiness. And that moment can become the beginning of awakening. Perspective changes everything. The same loneliness that once felt painful can become sacred solitude. The same failure that once embarrassed you can become your greatest teacher. The same uncertainty that terrified you can become freedom. Because certainty is not always peace. Sometimes certainty is stagnation. Life is movement. Life is evolution, and your perspective determines whether change destroys you or develops you. You must understand this deeply. Your mind is always creating meaning. Always. The question is not whether you interpret reality. The question is whether your interpretation empowers you or weakens you. Some people spend years trapped in resentment, replaying old memories, relieving betrayal, feeding anger, not realizing they are drinking poison, hoping someone else suffers. Perspective frees you. Forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation. Sometimes forgiveness simply means, I refuse to let this pain control my future. That is power your past may explain you. but it does not define you. The mistake is not your identity. The trauma is not your identity. The failure is not your identity. You are not the worst thing that happened to you. And you are not your darkest moment. Humans are capable of extraordinary rebirth. But rebirth requires letting go. And letting go feels terrifying because the ego confuses endings with death. But many endings are blessings in disguise. Some people leave your life because they were only meant for one chapter. Some opportunities disappear because they no longer align with who you are becoming. And some versions of yourself must die for your future self to live. Perspective allows you to stop resisting necessary endings, not passive surrender, conscious acceptance. The acceptance that life will contain pain, uncertainty, loss, change, but suffering increases when you fight reality itself. Inner peace comes when you stop demanding that life obey your expectations. The oak tree survives storms because it bends with the wind. Rigid minds break easily, flexible minds evolve. This is why perspective is strength. A conscious human being understands that every experience contains hidden meaning. Even pain, especially pain. Your wounds can become wisdom, your struggles can become strength. Your darkness can become depth. But only if you choose awareness instead of victimhood. Victimhood feels comforting because it removes responsibility. But it also removes power. The moment you take responsibility for your inner world, your transformation begins. Not responsibility for everything that happened to you, but responsibility for who you become because of it. That changes everything, because now your future is no longer controlled by your past. Now you become the author of your own life. Most people unconsciously repeat emotional cycles. Same fears, same reactions, same self-sabotage, different year, different face, same unconscious pattern. Awareness breaks the cycle. Perspective creates awareness. When you observe your thoughts instead of automatically believing them, you gain freedom. Not every thought deserves trust. Some thoughts were created by childhood fear, some by insecurity, some by past rejection. Your mind can lie to you. That is why consciousness matters. You must learn to question the voice inside your head, the voice saying, "You can't. You're too late. You're not capable. You'll fail again." Who told you that? And why did you believe it? Most limitations are psychological before they become physical. People live far below their potential because they accepted a small perspective of themselves. Do not underestimate the power of belief. Entire lives are built upon invisible assumptions. A person who believes life is hopeless sees evidence everywhere. A person who believes growth is possible also sees evidence everywhere. Reality often reflects internal focus, and this is why gratitude is transformative. Gratitude shifts perspective from scarcity to abundance. Not because your problems disappear, but because your awareness expands. You begin noticing what was always there, the breath in your lungs, the lessons in your failures, the strength you survived with, the opportunities still ahead of you. Gratitude reconnects you with life. Many people postpone happiness. I'll be happy when I succeed, when I'm loved, when I have money, when life becomes easier. But life keeps moving, and the person who cannot appreciate the present will never feel satisfied in the future. Perspective teaches you to see beauty even during becoming, not just after achievement. The sunrise does not ask permission to shine. The ocean does not apologize for its depth. And you must stop apologizing for becoming who you truly are. There is greatness inside you that fear has kept hidden, a deeper intelligence, a deeper courage, a deeper authenticity. But it requires you to stop shrinking yourself to fit into environments that no longer nourish your soul. Some people will misunderstand your growth. Let them. Some people will resist your transformation because your courage reminds them of their own fear. Let them. You were not born to live half awake. You were not born merely to survive. You were born to become conscious, to awaken, to discover who you truly are beneath conditioning and fear. And this journey is not easy, because awakening destroys illusions. You begin seeing how often society rewards conformity over authenticity, how often people chase distraction to avoid themselves, how often noise replaces meaning. But once you see clearly, you cannot unsee it. And although awareness can feel lonely at first, it eventually becomes liberation, because now you stop needing constant approval. You stop living for appearances. You stop betraying yourself for acceptance. Inner freedom begins when external validation loses control over your identity. Perspective changes everything. The same life can feel like a prison or a miracle depending on the eyes that see it. You can wake up resentful or grateful. You can see obstacles or opportunities. You can see suffering or growth. And every day your perspective shapes your destiny. So if you feel lost right now, listen carefully. This is not the end of your story. Confusion often comes before clarity. Breakdowns often come before breakthroughs. And the person you are becoming may require leaving behind the person you used to be. Trust the process of transformation. Even when you cannot fully see it yet, especially then, one day you will look back and realize the moments that nearly broke you were the moments that awakened you. One day you will thank life for the pain that forced you to evolve. One day you will understand that perspective was the hidden key all along. Not because life became perfect, but because you became conscious. And consciousness changes everything, so breathe deeply. Release the old story, release the fear, release the belief that you are powerless. You have survived too much to continue doubting your strength. The next chapter of your life depends on how you choose to see yourself from this moment forward. Not as broken, not as defeated, not as limited, but as someone still becoming, someone awakening, someone capable of transforming pain into wisdom and struggle into purpose. Perspective changes everything. And when your perspective changes, your life begins to change with it. Most people believe reality is something fixed, something happening completely outside of them. They wake up each morning assuming that their emotions are controlled by circumstances, by other people, by luck, or by events they cannot change. But one of the most powerful truths a human being can discover is that life is deeply influenced by perspective. The way you see the world shapes the way you experience it. Two people can face the exact same situation and walk away with completely different emotional outcomes because their interpretations are different. One sees failure, while the other sees a lesson. One sees rejection, while the other sees redirection. One sees pain as proof of weakness, while another sees pain as the beginning of transformation. The external event may remain the same, but the internal meaning changes everything. Human beings do not simply react to reality itself, they react to the meaning they attach to reality. This is why mindset is so important. If a person constantly believes life is unfair, they begin to notice only the negative parts of life. Their attention becomes trained to search for disappointment, criticism, and limitation. Over time, this creates a cycle where their beliefs reinforce their emotions, and their emotions reinforce their beliefs. The mind becomes conditioned to expect failure before even trying. Eventually, they stop taking risks, stop trusting themselves, and stop believing change is possible. Their perspective slowly becomes a prison they cannot see. At the same time, another person may experience struggle and still choose to believe that every difficulty contains an opportunity for growth. This does not mean they ignore pain or pretend life is perfect. It means they refuse to let temporary hardship define their identity. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" they begin asking, "What is this teaching me?" That single shift creates emotional strength. It transforms suffering into wisdom and obstacles into preparation. A person with this mindset develops resilience because they understand that challenges are part of becoming stronger, not evidence that they are weak. Perspective also shapes self-image. Many people carry invisible beliefs about themselves for years, without questioning where those beliefs came from. A person who constantly repeats thoughts like, "I am not good enough," or "I always fail," eventually begins acting according to those beliefs. Their confidence weakens before they even attempt something meaningful. They fear rejection, overthink every decision, and avoid opportunities that could change their lives. In many cases, the greatest limitation is not external reality, but the story the mind keeps repeating internally. When perspective changes, identity begins to change as well. A person who once saw themselves as broken can begin seeing themselves as healing. Someone who once saw themselves as weak can begin seeing themselves as growing. This internal transformation affects behavior, energy, and decisions. They begin taking action with more courage because they no longer see failure as the end of their worth. They understand that mistakes are part of development. Confidence is no longer dependent on perfection, but on the willingness to keep moving forward despite uncertainty. This idea becomes even more important during painful moments in life. Loss, heartbreak, rejection, and loneliness can either destroy a person emotionally or awaken them spiritually, depending on how those experiences are interpreted. Some people become bitter after pain because they see suffering as meaningless punishment. Others become wiser because they see suffering as a teacher. The pain itself may feel equally intense, but perspective determines whether that pain creates despair or transformation. Many of the strongest people in the world were shaped by difficult experiences they once thought would break them. Their strength did not come from avoiding darkness but from learning how to see darkness differently. Perspective also influences relationships, ambition, and purpose. A person who believes they are powerless waits for life to change before taking action. A person who believes they have influence over their future begins creating opportunities even in imperfect conditions. One mindset produces passivity, while the other produces growth. Over time, these small differences in thinking create completely different lives. The human mind is powerful because it constantly filters reality. Every day, people decide whether they will focus on limitation or possibility, fear or growth, resentment or gratitude. These choices may seem small, but repeated thoughts eventually shape character and destiny. When someone changes the way they see themselves in the world, they begin responding to life differently. That response changes actions, relationships, habits, and emotional strength. In this way, perspective does not merely influence reality from a distance. It actively helps create the reality a person experiences every day. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid pain at all costs. They fear failure, rejection, heartbreak, loneliness, and struggle because they believe suffering only exists to destroy them. The moment life becomes difficult, many immediately assume something is wrong with them or that life is unfair. But some of the greatest transformations in human history were born through pain. Pain has the ability to awaken strength, deepen awareness, and force growth in ways comfort never can. The difference lies in how a person responds to suffering. One person allows pain to break their spirit, while another uses pain as fuel for evolution. The experience may be painful for both, but one remains trapped while the other becomes stronger. Human beings often grow the most during the moments they never wanted to experience. Failure teaches lessons that success cannot. Heartbreak reveals emotional truths that comfort hides. Loneliness forces people to confront themselves honestly. Difficulties expose weaknesses, insecurities, fears, and unhealthy patterns that would otherwise remain hidden beneath distraction and routine. Pain strips away illusions. It forces a person to see reality more clearly. Although this process feels uncomfortable, it can become the beginning of wisdom. Many people discover their true strength only after life pushes them beyond their emotional limits. Before hardship, they may doubt themselves constantly. They may believe they are weak, incapable, or unable to survive difficulty. But when life tests them, something deeper begins to emerge. The human spirit is often stronger than the mind believes. People survive losses they thought would destroy them. They rebuild after failure. They heal after betrayal. They rise again after periods of darkness. Pain reveals an inner power that comfort rarely exposes. This does not mean suffering should be romanticized or intentionally pursued. Pain is real, and some experiences leave deep emotional scars. However, suffering becomes even more destructive when a person believes it has no meaning. When pain is viewed only as punishment, it creates bitterness, hopelessness, and emotional paralysis. But when pain is viewed as a teacher, transformation becomes possible. A person begins asking different questions. Instead of saying, "Why is life attacking me?" they begin asking, "What can this experience teach me about myself?" That shift creates emotional maturity. One of the most powerful effects of pain is that it forces self-awareness. During easy times, people often remain distracted by comfort, routine, and external validation. They avoid confronting their deeper fears and unresolved emotions. But suffering interrupts distraction. It creates silence. It forces reflection. Suddenly, a person begins questioning their choices, beliefs, relationships, and identity. Pain can expose toxic habits, unhealthy attachments, and emotional wounds that were ignored for years. Although painful, this awareness becomes the first step toward healing and growth. Pain also develops resilience. A person who has survived struggle gains a different relationship with fear. They realize they can endure discomfort and uncertainty without collapsing. Each challenge survived increases inner confidence. Not confidence based on appearance or approval, but confidence built through experience. The individual begins understanding that hardship is temporary, and that emotional pain does not last forever. This creates mental toughness and emotional stability. Many successful and influential people were shaped by painful experiences early in life. Rejection motivated them to improve. Failure taught discipline. Loss deepened their compassion. Isolation strengthened independence. Their struggles became the source of their strength because they refused to let suffering define them permanently. Instead of remaining victims of pain, they transformed pain into purpose. Pain also increases empathy. People who have suffered deeply often become more understanding of others, because struggle expands emotional depth. Someone who has experienced heartbreak understands emotional pain differently. Someone who has faced failure becomes less judgmental toward others who are struggling. Pain can soften arrogance and create compassion because it reminds people of human vulnerability. At the same time, unresolved pain can become dangerous if ignored. Some people attempt to escape suffering through distraction, addiction, anger, or emotional numbness. Instead of learning from pain, they suppress it. But suppressed pain does not disappear. It continues influencing thoughts, behavior, and relationships unconsciously. True growth requires facing pain honestly rather than running from it. Healing begins when a person allows themselves to feel, reflect, and grow from their experiences instead of denying them. The strongest people are not necessarily those who experienced the least pain. Often, they are the people who learned how to transform pain into wisdom. They stopped viewing suffering as proof of weakness and began seeing it as part of becoming stronger. Every difficult season became an opportunity to evolve mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Over time, they realized that some of the moments they once hated were the very moments that shaped their character the most. Pain became power because they refused to let suffering remain meaningless. The human mind is one of the most powerful forces in existence. It can create confidence or fear, peace or anxiety, freedom or limitation. Every day, people live inside mental patterns they may not even realize are controlling them. Thoughts become beliefs, beliefs become habits, and habits slowly shape reality. This is why the mind can either become a prison that traps a person in fear and negativity, or a source of freedom that allows growth, purpose, and transformation. The difference depends on awareness and the ability to control one's inner world instead of being controlled by it. Many people suffer more from their thoughts than from reality itself. A person may fail once and immediately begin telling themselves they are a failure. Another may experience rejection and conclude they are unworthy of love or success. Over time, these thoughts repeat so often that they begin feeling like truth. The mind creates invisible walls that limit action, confidence, and possibility. A person may physically have opportunities in front of them, but mentally they feel trapped because their beliefs tell them they are incapable, weak, or destined to fail. Negative thinking becomes especially dangerous when it operates unconsciously. Most people do not stop to question the voice inside their head. They automatically believe every fear, doubt, and insecurity. If the mind says you are not good enough, they accept it as reality. If the mind says you will fail, they avoid taking risks altogether. Gradually, the individual becomes imprisoned by thoughts they never consciously chose. Their entire life begins revolving around avoiding discomfort, rejection, and uncertainty. The prison is invisible, yet it controls everything. Fear is one of the strongest mental chains people experience. Fear convinces individuals to remain inside familiar environments, even when those environments are unhealthy or limiting. People stay in toxic relationships, avoid chasing dreams, and silence their authentic selves because the mind associates uncertainty with danger. The fear of failure often becomes stronger than the desire for growth. As a result, many people live far below their true potential, not because they lack ability, but because their minds have conditioned them to believe safety is more important than transformation. The mind also creates suffering through comparison. Modern life constantly encourages people to compare themselves with others. Someone else appears more successful, more attractive, more confident, or more accomplished, and suddenly the mind begins generating feelings of inadequacy. Instead of appreciating personal growth, people focus on what they lack. This endless comparison creates anxiety and emotional exhaustion because the mind is always measuring worth through external standards. A person becomes trapped chasing validation rather than building genuine self-respect. At the same time, the mind also contains the ability to create freedom. Freedom begins when a person becomes aware of their thoughts instead of automatically obeying them. Awareness creates distance between the individual and the negative voice inside their head. Instead of immediately believing every fearful thought, they begin observing it critically. They ask themselves whether the thought is actually true or simply a product of past pain, insecurity, or conditioning. This awareness weakens the power of destructive mental patterns. A free mind understands that thoughts are not always reality. Fear can exaggerate danger. Insecurity can distort self-image. Past trauma can influence perception. Once a person realizes this, they stop allowing temporary emotions to define their identity. They become more conscious of the stories they repeat internally. Instead of saying, "I always fail," they begin saying, "I am learning." Instead of believing, "I am broken," they begin understanding that healing is possible. These shifts may seem small, but they gradually transform identity and behavior. Freedom also comes through responsibility. Many people remain trapped because they blame everything outside themselves for their emotional state. They blame circumstances, other people, or the past. While painful experiences are real, constantly seeing oneself as powerless strengthens mental imprisonment. Real growth begins when a person accepts responsibility for their mindset, reactions, and choices. This does not mean controlling every external event, but it means reclaiming authority over the inner world. Discipline plays an important role in mental freedom as well. The mind naturally seeks comfort and avoidance, but freedom often requires discomfort. A person must train themselves to face fears, challenge limiting beliefs, and continue moving forward despite uncertainty. Each small act of courage weakens the mental prison and strengthens inner confidence. Over time, the individual realizes they are capable of more than they once believed. The human mind constantly shapes reality through focus, interpretation, and belief. A mind consumed by fear sees obstacles everywhere. A mind trained through awareness sees opportunities even during struggle. One mindset creates paralysis, while the other creates possibility. This is why inner freedom is not something given by the outside world. It is developed through consciousness, self-awareness, and the willingness to challenge the invisible limitations created by the mind itself. Fear is one of the most misunderstood emotions in human life. Most people see fear as a warning sign that they should stop, retreat, or avoid whatever makes them uncomfortable. The moment fear appears, they assume danger is present. As a result, they spend years running away from opportunities that could have transformed them. They avoid difficult conversations, postpone their dreams, refuse change, and remain trapped inside routines that feel safe but slowly destroy their potential. Yet fear is not always proof that something is wrong. In many cases, fear appears precisely because growth is happening. Every meaningful transformation in life requires stepping into uncertainty. No person becomes stronger, wiser, or more capable while remaining completely comfortable. Growth demands movement beyond familiar limits, and the mind naturally resists this process. Human beings are psychologically attached to what feels known, even when what is familiar is unhealthy or limiting. The brain interprets uncertainty as potential danger because it prefers predictability and control. This is why fear often appears whenever a person begins moving toward a higher version of themselves. A person who wants to start a new career may feel fear because they are leaving behind security. Someone speaking their truth for the first time may feel fear because they risk rejection. A person beginning self-improvement may feel fear because they are abandoning old habits and identities that once felt comfortable. Fear emerges not because growth is wrong, but because transformation threatens the old version of the self. The mind struggles to separate unfamiliarity from actual danger. Many people mistakenly believe confident individuals feel no fear. In reality, confidence often built through repeatedly acting despite fear. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision to move forward, even while fear exists. Some of the strongest people in the world experience fear regularly, but they refuse to let it control their choices. They understand that fear is temporary, while regret can last a lifetime. Fear becomes dangerous when it controls identity. A person who constantly avoids discomfort slowly teaches themselves that they are incapable of handling challenge. Every act of avoidance strengthens insecurity. Over time, the individual becomes more anxious, more dependent on safety, and more disconnected from their true potential. Their world becomes smaller because fear determines their decisions. They stop taking risks, stop expressing themselves honestly, and stop pursuing meaningful goals because they prioritize comfort over growth. At the same time, facing fear gradually expands personal power. Every moment a person confronts discomfort, they send a new message to the mind: I can survive this. This creates resilience and self-trust. A person who once feared failure learns that failure is survivable. Someone afraid of rejection discovers that rejection does not destroy their worth. The individual begins realizing that many fears are psychological barriers rather than actual threats. Each challenge faced weakens fear's control and strengthens inner confidence. Fear also reveals where growth is needed most. People are often emotionally triggered by the exact areas of life that require healing or development. A person terrified of being alone may need to develop self-worth independent of relationships. Someone afraid of failure may need to release perfectionism and learn resilience. A person afraid of judgment may need to stop living for external validation. Fear points toward unresolved insecurities and hidden limitations. Instead of automatically running from fear, a conscious person begins asking what fear is trying to reveal. This idea becomes especially important in personal transformation. Whenever someone begins changing deeply, fear intensifies because the old identity resists disappearing. The familiar version of the self feels threatened. Old habits, toxic environments, and limiting beliefs attempt to pull the person backward because change creates uncertainty. Many individuals quit during this stage because they interpret discomfort as proof they are failing. In reality, discomfort is often evidence that growth has already begun. Fear also teaches humility and awareness. It reminds human beings that growth is not always easy or comfortable. The process of becoming stronger often involves confusion, vulnerability, and emotional struggle. However, these difficult emotions are part of transformation, not signs that transformation is impossible. Every meaningful achievement in life exists on the other side of uncertainty. The fear felt before growth is temporary, but the strength gained afterward can last forever. The people who create meaningful lives are not those who avoided fear completely. They are the ones who refuse to worship fear. They understood that fear is a natural part of becoming something greater. Instead of waiting to feel perfectly ready, they acted anyway. Over time, they discovered that fear loses power when confronted directly. What once seemed impossible becomes manageable, and what once felt terrifying becomes proof of personal evolution. Fear stops being an enemy and becomes evidence that a person is stepping beyond limitation into growth. One of the deepest truths about human nature is that every person carries hidden parts within themselves. These hidden parts include fears, insecurities, anger, jealousy, selfish desires, painful memories, and emotions people often try to deny or suppress. Carl Jung described this hidden side as the shadow. The shadow represents everything a person rejects about themselves, because it feels uncomfortable, embarrassing, or socially unacceptable. Most people spend years pretending these parts do not exist. But ignoring the shadow does not make it disappear. Instead, the hidden side continues influencing thoughts, emotions, and behavior unconsciously. True transformation begins when a person stops running from their inner darkness and begins facing it honestly. From childhood, many individuals learn to hide certain emotions or traits to gain acceptance. A child may learn that showing anger is wrong, so they suppress it. Another may hide sadness to appear strong. Someone may silence their authentic personality to fit social expectations. Over time, these rejected emotions and traits become buried inside the unconscious mind. The person creates a mask for the world while disconnecting from parts of their true self. Eventually, they may not even realize how much of their identity is built upon performance rather than authenticity. The danger of suppressing the shadow is that hidden emotions eventually express themselves in unhealthy ways. A person who denies anger may suddenly explode emotionally over small situations. Someone who suppresses insecurity may become controlling or arrogant to hide feelings of weakness. A person who refuses to acknowledge jealousy may secretly resent the success of others. The unconscious mind always seeks expression. What is ignored internally eventually appears externally through behavior, emotional reactions, and relationships. Many people believe they are good simply because they avoid confronting their darker emotions. But pretending darkness does not exist creates self-deception, not wisdom. Real self-awareness requires honesty. It requires admitting uncomfortable truths about oneself without becoming consumed by shame. Every human being has flaws, fears, selfish impulses, and emotional wounds. Accepting this reality creates humility and emotional maturity. A conscious person does not pretend to be perfect. Instead, they become aware of their imperfections and learn how to manage them responsibly. Facing the shadow can feel deeply uncomfortable because it challenges the identity people have created for themselves. Most individuals prefer seeing themselves as completely rational, kind, or morally superior. But shadow work reveals contradictions within human nature. A person may discover hidden resentment beneath their kindness or fear beneath their confidence. This realization can feel painful because it destroys illusions about who they thought they were. However, this discomfort is necessary for growth. Transformation begins when illusion ends. The shadow also influences relationships in powerful ways. Often, people project their hidden traits onto others without realizing it. Someone who suppresses their own insecurity may constantly criticize others for appearing weak. A person who denies selfishness within themselves may become overly judgmental towards selfish behavior in others. The qualities that trigger strong emotional reactions are often connected to hidden parts of the self. By becoming aware of these patterns, people gain insight into their unconscious mind and emotional wounds. Facing the shadow does not mean becoming consumed by negativity. It means integrating all aspects of oneself consciously instead of allowing hidden emotions to operate in darkness. A person who acknowledges anger can learn healthy ways to express it instead of becoming emotionally explosive. Someone who recognizes insecurity can begin healing rather than hiding behind arrogance. Awareness creates choice. Once unconscious patterns become conscious, they lose much of their control. This process also leads to authenticity. Many people spend years trying to become who society expects them to be. They hide their true emotions, desires, creativity, and individuality to gain approval. Over time, this creates emotional exhaustion and inner emptiness because they are disconnected from their authentic self. Shadow work allows a person to reconnect with the parts of themselves they abandoned out of fear or shame. It creates wholeness rather than performance. Courage is required for this journey because confronting the shadow means taking responsibility for oneself honestly. It is easier to blame the world, other people, or circumstances for emotional pain than to examine one's own unconscious patterns. But self-awareness creates freedom. The more conscious a person becomes of their inner world, the less controlled they are by hidden fears and destructive habits. Many people search for meaning, peace, and transformation outside themselves while avoiding the inner work required for genuine growth. Yet the path toward wisdom often begins internally. The darkness people fear confronting may contain the exact lessons they need most. Hidden pain can become healing. Buried emotions can become understanding. Fear can become strength once it is faced directly. Real transformation is not about pretending darkness does not exist. It is about becoming conscious enough to face every part of oneself with honesty, responsibility, and awareness. One of the hardest parts of personal growth is accepting that transformation requires letting go of the old version of yourself. Most people want change while still holding on to the same habits, beliefs, fears, and identities that created their current reality. They want a new life without becoming a new person internally. But real growth demands release. A person cannot move toward a stronger future while remaining emotionally attached to outdated patterns that no longer serve them. Human beings naturally become attached to familiarity, even when it causes suffering. The mind finds comfort in what is known, because familiarity creates a sense of safety and predictability. This is why many people remain trapped in toxic relationships, unhealthy routines, negative thinking, or limiting environments for years. The pain may be obvious, but the fear of change feels even greater. The unknown appears dangerous, while the familiar feels manageable. As a result, people often choose temporary comfort over long-term growth. The old version of yourself is built from past experiences, conditioning, emotional wounds, habits, and beliefs. Over time, these patterns become part of identity. A person may begin defining themselves through past failures, heartbreaks, fears, or insecurities without realizing it. They repeatedly tell themselves stories like, "This is just who I am," even when those beliefs are keeping them emotionally trapped. Identity becomes a psychological prison because the individual feels obligated to remain consistent with the person they used to be. Growth begins when a person questions whether their current identity still aligns with who they want to become. This process is uncomfortable because it forces self-examination. A person may realize that certain friendships drain their energy, certain habits weaken their discipline, or certain beliefs limit their confidence. Suddenly, they face a difficult truth. The life they desire cannot coexist with the mindset and behaviors they currently hold on to. Letting go is painful because the ego fears change. The ego wants certainty, control, and familiarity. Even unhealthy patterns can feel emotionally safe simply because they are known. When someone begins changing deeply, they may feel lost or uncertain because the old identity starts dissolving before the new identity fully forms. This creates an emotional transition period where a person no longer feels connected to their past, but has not yet fully grown into their future. Many people quit during this stage because discomfort convinces them they are moving in the wrong direction. In reality, this discomfort is often proof that transformation is taking place. One of the most important things a person can release is limiting beliefs. Many individuals carry beliefs formed during childhood or painful experiences that continue shaping their lives unconsciously. Someone rejected in the past may believe they are unworthy of love. A person who failed early may believe they are incapable of success. These beliefs become internal limitations that influence decisions, relationships, and confidence. Letting go of the old self means challenging these mental stories instead of continuing to live according to them. Growth also requires releasing emotional attachments to the past. Some people spend years reliving old pain, replaying mistakes, or identifying with previous versions of themselves. They remain emotionally connected to who they were during their worst moments. But healing requires recognizing that the past may explain someone's wounds without defining their future. A person is not obligated to remain the same forever simply because they once struggled. Relationships often change during personal transformation as well. When someone begins evolving mentally and emotionally, certain connections may no longer align with their growth. Some people resist change because it threatens the familiar dynamics they are comfortable with. Others may misunderstand or criticize transformation because it reminds them of their own fear of growth. Letting go of the old self sometimes means accepting that not everyone can continue walking beside you into the next stage of life. Discipline plays a major role in this process. Becoming a stronger person is not only about inspiration or emotional breakthroughs. It also requires consistent action. Old habits must be replaced with healthier ones. Self-destructive behaviors must be confronted honestly. Temporary comfort must sometimes be sacrificed for long-term purpose. Each disciplined choice strengthens the new identity a person is creating. Transformation is not about pretending the past never existed. The old version of yourself still contains lessons, scars, wisdom, and experiences that shaped who you are. But growth means refusing to remain imprisoned by outdated patterns. It means understanding that you are allowed to evolve beyond old fears, old mistakes, and old limitations. Every meaningful chapter in life requires the courage to release what no longer serves your future. The strongest people are not those who never changed. They are the ones willing to let parts of themselves die so something greater could emerge. They understand that becoming who they are meant to be requires surrendering who they no longer need to remain. Awareness is one of the most powerful forces in human transformation because it changes the relationship a person has with themselves, their emotions, and the world around them. Most people move through life unconsciously, repeating the same habits, emotional reactions, and thought patterns without truly understanding why. They live on autopilot. Their fears control their decisions, their emotions control their behavior, and their unconscious beliefs shape their reality. They may blame circumstances or other people for their suffering, without realizing that many of their struggles are rooted in patterns they have never consciously examined. Awareness changes this completely, because it brings hidden patterns into the light. The moment a person becomes aware of their thoughts, they stop being fully controlled by them. Before awareness, a negative thought immediately feels like truth. If the mind says, "I am not good enough," the person believes it automatically. If fear appears, they assume they must avoid whatever makes them uncomfortable. But awareness creates space between the thought and the individual. Instead of instantly reacting, the person begins observing. They ask questions. They become conscious of the internal dialogue that has been shaping their emotions and choices for years. This simple shift creates enormous freedom. A person who observes their thoughts realizes that not every thought deserves trust. Some thoughts are products of insecurity, childhood conditioning, past trauma, or fear. Awareness helps people recognize how often they create suffering through interpretation rather than reality itself. A person may realize they constantly expect rejection because of previous emotional wounds. Another may discover that perfectionism has been creating anxiety and self-hatred for years. Once these patterns become visible, change becomes possible. Awareness also transforms emotional life. Most people either suppress emotions or become overwhelmed by them because they do not fully understand what they are feeling. Anger, sadness, jealousy, insecurity, and fear operate unconsciously beneath the surface, influencing behavior without awareness. Someone may become defensive during criticism, without understanding that deep insecurity is being triggered internally. Another person may seek constant validation because they unconsciously fear being unworthy. Awareness allows individuals to identify the deeper emotional causes behind their reactions, instead of remaining trapped in automatic behavior. This emotional awareness increases self-control. A conscious person does not lose themselves completely inside every temporary emotion. They still feel pain, frustration, or fear, but they no longer become entirely consumed by those emotions. Instead of reacting impulsively, they pause and reflect. This ability to observe internal experiences calmly creates maturity and emotional intelligence. The individual becomes less controlled by anger, fear, or insecurity because awareness weakens emotional impulsiveness. Awareness also reveals the hidden patterns shaping daily life. Many people unconsciously repeat the same destructive cycles for years. They choose similar unhealthy relationships, repeat self-sabotaging behaviors, or continue habits that damage their confidence and peace. Without awareness, these patterns continue endlessly because the person never pauses to examine them honestly. Once awareness develops, however, patterns become impossible to ignore. A person begins noticing how certain environments drain their energy, how negative self-talk weakens motivation, or how avoidance creates unnecessary suffering. This recognition becomes the first step toward transformation. One of the most important aspects of awareness is personal responsibility. Unconscious living encourages blame. People blame their past, their circumstances, or others for every difficulty in life. While painful experiences are real and impactful, awareness teaches that healing and growth require responsibility for one's own inner world. A person cannot always control external events, but they can become conscious of how they respond to them. This shift from victimhood to responsibility changes everything because it restores personal power. Awareness also deepens authenticity. Many individuals spend their lives performing for society, hiding parts of themselves to gain approval or avoid rejection. They become disconnected from their true desires, values, and emotions. Through awareness, a person begins recognizing where they have been pretending, people-pleasing, or abandoning themselves. They become more honest about who they are and what truly matters to them. This honesty creates inner peace because the individual is no longer living entirely according to external expectations. The journey toward awareness is not always comfortable. Becoming conscious often means confronting painful truths about oneself. It may reveal fears, insecurities, unresolved trauma, or destructive habits that were previously ignored. Many people avoid self-awareness because distraction feels easier than honesty. But lasting transformation is impossible without consciousness. A person cannot change patterns they refuse to see. Over time, awareness changes every aspect of life. Relationships improve because communication becomes more conscious. Emotional stability increases because reactions become intentional rather than impulsive. Confidence grows because the individual stops being unconsciously controlled by fear and limiting beliefs. Most importantly, awareness reconnects people with the present moment, instead of trapping them in unconscious cycles of regret, anxiety, and emotional confusion. The more conscious a person becomes, the more freedom they experience internally, and that inner freedom begins transforming the entire direction of their life.